episode of DRL is brought to you by Hella Cocktail Company. At this point in the quarantine, you've probably become a teacher, a chef, a housekeeper, a hairdresser, a barista, a trainer, and so much more. But when it's time to unwind from all that, Hella Cocktail Company can turn you into a bartender, a great one. Hella Cocktail Company features premium bitters and soda, and cocktail mixes. My favorite is the spicy margarita mix. I use it to make chili watermelon margaritas, and I just add tequila, some watermelon juice, and then a few dashes of the smoked chili bitters. It's so good. Hella Bitters and Soda is now available at Whole Foods, or you can use code DRL online at hellacocktail.co for free shipping. Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome back to another episode of DRL, where we're talking everything dating, relationships, and love. I'm your host, Tennesha Wood. I hope you guys are coping okay, because it's a lot this year. And I personally have been having a lot of trouble just day to day. I feel like I finally got to that place in the quarantine where I had developed a really good routine around work and working out and just mindfulness and reading. And it felt like I was getting to a really good mental space. And then boom, George Floyd. And then one after the other, which has been happening, but it just now being the thing that everybody's talking about. I can't not see it. I can't not hear about it. And over the last 2 weeks, it's been really hard for me to get back in rhythm, you know? So anyway, I asked Kenya Crawford to come on today. She's a psychotherapist, and I want to talk to her just about how we deal with this. Like, where do we go from here? Like mentally, how, emotionally, how do we on a daily basis process everything that's going on while, still maintaining? Hi, Kenya.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Taking it day by day.
Yeah, thanks for coming on today.
No problem. Excited to be here.
Yes. So for Black people right now, everything feels and is just heavy. I don't really know what to do, to be quite honest. Some days I get up and I feel like I'm on my phone all day. I just feel like I'm being consumed, but at the same time, I can't put it down. I can't not think about what's happening and, the updates and where are we now? And is this person in jail? Did this reform get passed? It's like I have to know, and I'm so in it and I don't know how to step back. So I guess for me and everybody listening that might be having that issue right now, how do you unplug and step back without feeling like there's a little bit of guilt there too? The other day I went to the beach, and I remember I was at the beach and I started crying because I was like, man, I just get to be at the beach today having fun. Meanwhile, there's people out there just losing their lives for no reason at all. And I felt guilty for the moment of fun, the moment that I wasn't thinking about it. I caught myself having fun for a moment. And then I felt guilty for the fun. So how do we cope?
And I think that's a really great question, especially for Black folk. And, something I frequently say to my clients is I'm in the business of working towards Black liberation and working towards us as Black folk thriving and not just surviving. And the first part of that is really acknowledging what's happening to us, our experiences of racial trauma. And with a lot of my clients, I don't think people realize how traumatic it can be to be on something like social media, to be on Twitter all day, to be on Instagram all day, especially when those tools used to be spaces of so much joy for us and so much laughter, right? We're not getting that on Instagram and Twitter anymore. What we're getting is the constant reminder of white supremacy, the constant reminder that our Black folk are continuously being murdered and there's no accountability to that. So, the intention of what people were using social media for isn't present anymore. So I think it's important for us to recognize that there's trauma happening and trauma needs a response.
Mhm.
And frequently that response is kind of pulling yourself away from social media, pulling yourself away from some of those conversations. And you're right, the guilt comes up. The guilt of, why don't I should know every single thing that's happening in this case. I should be at every protest. I should be, performing my activism in this way. And I have to remind a lot of my clients, like, our job in dismantling white supremacy isn't to show up everywhere, right? That's white supremacy telling us that, we're trying to burn ourselves out in this fight that isn't only our fight to be engaged in. So I challenge my clients to, like, engage in that rest and that resilience so that they can cope through all of this.
Have you found that most of your Black clients are having trouble engaging with white people, maybe their friends or at the workplace or just in general right now? Have you found that the dynamics have really changed in how people are engaging?
Oh, absolutely. So majority of my clients are Black. And I've seen that for many of them, we've had to work around creating new boundaries with work folk or folk at work, family, friends, partners, all of these people in your lives that have claimed to be allies, that have claimed to want to show up for Black lives. But when it comes time to it, they don't really know what to do. I'm thinking of you text messages, or
Yep.
how you doing, or I'm so sorry about those other white people. Like, stop. So I work with my clients to create those boundaries, because what's happening is there's this performative activism that's happening in those text messages, in those statements from corporations, in those conversations, and that's not getting you closer to coping. That's not getting you closer to healing. So really creating those boundaries have been huge.
So, how do you maintain authenticity in those conversations, but also recognizing the fact that, I have to come back to work and see these people tomorrow? So, what do you say in a situation like that? How should they respond to something like, well, how are you? When really you're not good, particularly coming from a white person.
I work with clients to kind of figure out, like, what is your role in this relationship, right? Like, are you someone who's their superior or not? Because all of those dynamics are going to also play out. I also work with clients to really highlight, like, what are the risk factors of you creating this boundary? Is this someone that you need to report to tomorrow? Is this someone that you need to work with in a week from now? Kind of planning out all of those elements. And then I also, challenge clients to create a conversation around, what is your intention in asking me how I'm doing right now? Is this out of performance, or is this a genuine care? And sometimes people feel comfortable enough to ask that question. Sometimes people don't. So depending on where they are in the company, can they do that? And also, like, sometimes I challenge clients to say, I really want to focus on the task at hand. It's moving you away from the conversation, creating that boundary, but also saying, I come here to work, right? I don't come here to be your Black friend. I don't come here to be your Black employer friend, right? I'm coming here to do this role in this moment.
And that's, I think, the complication in it is right now we are in a time where nothing is separate, right? Like corporations are releasing statements about what performative, most of them are performative, are releasing statements about, what they've done or what they're going to do. And so it is inherently just in the workplace. Like, if you work for a company that just released a statement, surely everybody's talking about it. Surely, you're the Black person on the team. So it comes down to you, which is part of the problem. The attention might be appreciated, but it's also like you resent it in a way. Like, it's like, where were you? I've been working here for 10 years.
Absolutely.
So it's a little annoying now. Like, it's almost like a little, like, it feels like it's too little too late. When like you break up with a significant other and then it's like you're weeping and you're crying and you're sad. And then like months later, they, try to hit you up and you're like, I'm kind of like, no, it's too late. Like, where were you when I needed you for real? I mean, I still need you, in this context, we still need everybody to be in this fight, but it just feels, it's hard for me to articulate what it feels like, but
And I'm happy that you're bringing this up because I was just having this conversation with a colleague of mine. For me, it feels abusive in that we're creating these statements to say, okay, Black Lives Matter, we stand with the movement, we care about the movement, but we're not doing that within the work, right? We're not doing that within the corporation or the organization. And for so long, they've actually been kind of confronting or conflicting with the Black Lives Matter movement. So the reason why I claim for it to be abusive is because it creates this guise as if, this is an inclusive space. This is a space where Black folk can feel empowered and liberated. And the very Black folk that are there are not feeling that. So there's this question of, am I doing something wrong? They said they had this statement and they care, but I don't feel like they care. So what's happening for me? Which enforces this gaslighting that happens in Black folk, right? This thought and this process of second guessing a microaggression from Tim down the street, or whatever happens in that corporation or that organization. So I find it to be rather abusive.
So often on social media, I've been in the comments and I've seen what people have said, and there's this urge to correct them or to say, no, here's why you shouldn't say that. Here's a follow-up article on why your whole premise and idea about this is wrong. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing to do from a mental health standpoint?
It's not a black and white answer. For some of my clients, educating and, challenging with the social media trolls can be their form of self-care, can be their form of advocacy. But I do think to a certain extent that can teeter into being disruptive if it's disrupting your own care of self. If you were up until 3 a.m., sending these articles or arguing with people or going back and forth, like, what is your intentionality before coming into this? For some, it's to make fun of, to kind of berate or what have you. Whereas for others, it's genuinely like, this is my role as an educator and I want to share more information. So acknowledging the intention is going to be rather important, and also checking in with yourself of when you need to tap out and when you need to kind of fall back and care for you is going to be important in assessing that mental health of that action.
So one thing I'm finding now is that it feels like to me as a Black woman that there's less focus on Black women. I feel a little guilty for even saying this, but I do feel like when I'm on social media, I'm watching the news, it feels like the message that this happens to Black women too is getting very lost. And then I get frustrated because I'm like, well, I'm here talking about and informing people about everything happening to Black men. Why is it that I don't hear Black men talking about, the fact that this is happening to women too as much? But then I go back to a feeling of, well, I don't want to cause a divide within Black people. So this is not something that I'm going to speak on or bring up, but it is something that I'm feeling. And so then there's the I need to be in solidarity with Black people. So I'm not going to dare speak out against a Black man. But then I feel like, well, I should speak out because we can't have, so I go back and forth, and there's again these feelings of guilt from that.
The way I approach this work of Black liberation is from an intersectional lens. So I can't say, I'm fighting for Black lives if I'm not talking about Black women, if I'm not talking about Black trans women, right? So we need to, as a community, kind of deepen that conversation so that when we call attention to the deaths and the murders of Black women, we're not moving the conversation away from Black men, right? We're not saying like, oh, we don't care about Black men anymore, but we are saying is that it sounds and it feels and it seems that the only voices that are really being uplifted and really calling attention to are Black men. And that's a problem within itself, right? That's calling out the sexism of the field, right? The sexism of advocacy and activism. And what we know from scholars time and time again is that we're not free until we're all free. So Black men can be liberated, but if we're not, no one's liberated. So I think that has been something that's really settled in my soul when I'm experiencing that guilt of, I don't want to critique my Black men, but I also know like I need to hold y'all accountable because we all need to be moving in this way to ensure that there's that empowerment of all of us.
And that is one thing I've realized in the last couple of days with myself is that I don't think I've personally been advocating as a whole. I don't think I've been talking about what trans people are experiencing and how much they are being targeted. And I I think like as Black people, we really do need to take a look at the whole scope of it. And it's not just about straight Black men or straight Black women. Like it's all Black lives. So as a therapist, how do you cope with this? Like, because you're taking it in all day. Like you're taking in what everybody says, how they're feeling, how they're trying to cope. But what do you do to get away from all that or to unwind from all that?
Boundaries have been my best friend. And anyone who's close to me or in my life knows that I'm like the boundary queen. So I'm very click. Like I work from 9 to 6, nothing beyond, nothing earlier, nothing later. I also try to meditate every day, sometimes twice a day in between sessions and whatnot. But a large part has been my disconnection from social media. That kind of plays as a catch 22 sometimes because I do learn about things through my sessions, which can be tough because it's the first time I'm hearing of it. So I'm like holding it with my client. But I've gotten to a space in my clinical work where I can kind of hold my emotional response while also imagining what's happening emotionally for my client. And we both can sit in that process together. So it's actually allowed me to really understand my clients much more because I'm feeling it with them. And, for me, one of the tools that I've used with social media specifically, because sometimes I like to get on and like, talk about insecure, talk about whatever, because that's what I used to use social media for. But I will say, I have a like 5 tweet or 5 Instagram posts around particular brutality or racial trauma, right? So if I'm scrolling and I see 5 posts about racial trauma, that's when I get off. So once I get to that limit, then I remove myself because I say, all right, I can't do 10 posts about this. I can't do 15 because it becomes too draining and it becomes too engulfing in my own mental health. And I
Yeah.
need to be able to make sure that I'm full, I'm here, I'm present so I can hold it for all my clients.
What's the thing called where you feel something by seeing it happen, but it doesn't need to happen to you?
Vicarious trauma.
Yes, that. I think when we're watching over and over again, it's like we're experiencing the same trauma just over and over and over. And it's like we have to stop. I saw this chart the other day that was saying how different emotions affect different parts of your body. I think it's like grief affects the lungs, stress affects the heart, and so on. And if we just keep doing it over and over, it's literally affecting our health, like not just your mental health, but all physically, like your heart is deteriorating from the stress of this trauma and feeling like you're the person going through it, even though it's not you. But when you're seeing somebody that looks like you,
And that's why I think validating and acknowledging racial trauma and vicarious trauma is so important for our folk because frequently we've either suppressed and or responded with this numbness of, well, this is just what it is, right? This is what we know. This has been present for the last 400 years. And that can be so detrimental to us because we don't recognize that we need healing, that we need these spaces to kind of care for ourselves if we keep saying, oh, well, this is just what it is. I'm just going to keep going through Instagram, keep going through social media because that's what I've always done. So, really acknowledging and validating that this is even present and this is a problem that we need to address. I feel like that's where the healing starts for Black folk.
it's hard to put the to put the phone down.
So, when people say that, though, right, I also want to work with people to figure out what are you going to replace social media with? Right? Because we've gotten so used to being on our phones for hours. It's the thing that we do when we're like waiting for something to happen or just feeling idle. What can you now replace social media with? Is it a book? Is it calling a friend? Is it, you want something funny. So maybe you're watching a funny show or a funny movie. Like it's really for me challenging my clients of like, what was your intention about going on Instagram right now? What were you trying to do? What was that? And what we've noticed is sometimes people go on social media to feel good, to feel happy, but that's not happening for Black folk right now.
No.
So where can you receive that happiness? Where can you receive that joy? And let's do that instead.
Do you think that it's possible to overcome trauma if you're still experiencing it? So I know oftentimes people go to therapy after an event has happened. So maybe they get divorced and they're having trouble, coping through a new single life. But the divorce is done. They're no longer in that trauma, or they're trying to, if somebody's in like in couples therapy, they've gotten to a place where they said, okay, we're going to work through this. That's why we're here. But how do you work through a trauma that isn't gone yet?
That's a great question. That's a beautiful question. And I get that question a lot, particularly with clients that are working in workplaces that are inherently racist, and they're trying to heal from that while still getting a check and paying their bills, right? Because that's a necessity. So it can be a difficult battle. There is the ease of with the divorce, it's final, it happened at this time, we're done and we can move forward. If one is continuously experiencing the trauma and it's becoming so detrimental, sometimes that healing can't exist. Sometimes we can find things to bring a little bit more joy to your life, a little bit more ease, a little bit more, groundedness to your life. But if it's becoming so distressing on a daily moment, I don't know if healing can exist in that way. So I'm wondering if you're also referencing like, can we heal from racial trauma while still experiencing racial trauma?
Yeah.
And in response to that, yes, right? Because as Black folk, I think it's important for us to figure out what our healing looks like from that trauma. And that healing may change, that those coping skills may change over the years, over the experiences, but that doesn't mean that we can't heal from this.
In the last couple weeks, there's just been hashtag after hashtag after hashtag. And the world was appalled, and oh my God, I didn't realize there was so much racism. Okay, yeah, there is. I want to be an ally. I want to help change laws. I want to do this. I want to do that. Great. I love it. But then boom, it happens the next day again.
Yep.
And if I were in a marriage, that would be like a divorce for me. Like you can't keep doing the same thing, telling me you're sorry, and then expect that we're just going to keep trying to heal the same BS. And so that's the cycle that I feel like right now, where I'm like, can we really heal if the same thing is happening over and over? It just seems like a scab, and you just keep picking the scab every time it heals. It gets that new layer of skin, and then you pick it, and then it bleeds again, and then it just and it never goes away.
Yeah.
And so that's the frustration that I'm feeling right now, is just like, will it ever stop? And I hate to seem, negative or pessimistic, but that's really the question that keeps looming for me. Is just, will it ever stop?
To be very honest with you, I've sat on this for a while, and I don't think it's going to, at least not in my lifetime. To be very honest with you, the world that I see, the world that I hope for Black folk to live in, which has completely dismantled white supremacy, I don't know if that is plausible in my lifetime. Maybe it is for generations after me, but to be very honest with you, I don't see it. I just don't, because we're still in this state of being performative and not genuinely actionable. We're still in this state of being reactionary and not proactive. So until that large shift happens, I don't see it. I do see that we're making strides towards that, right? If you would have told me 5 years ago, all these corporations would have been saying Black Lives Matter, I probably would have laughed in your face, right? So we are making those progressions, but are we making them in the ways that they need to be made? Who knows? 20 years from now, we might be having a very different conversation.
Do you have any suggestions for white allies on how they should be sensitive and approaching Black people when it comes to the subject?
First, I want to mention, I don't really align with the term allies. And the reason why I kind of reject it a bit is because it feels to me almost like a gold star that white folk like to, say like, I have this badge, right? I'm an ally. I do this, I do that.
I don't think it can be given. I think it has to be earned.
Exactly.
And a person outside of your group has to give that to you. And it has to be earned daily, not just like,
daily. Yes, there's a continuous earning of such, right? And for me, it feels like I can refer to someone as an ally, but I feel really uncomfortable when people are saying like, oh, I'm an ally to this community, because who deemed you as such, right? What has that work looked like? And who's holding you accountable to that? Those are three questions that a lot of the times white folks don't have the answers to. So when I hear that from them, I'm like, a little uncomfortable. Now, in terms of what they can do, right? Because this is the question that so many white people are asking, like, what do I do? This is such a bad thing. Who do I donate to? Like, how do I make this problem stop? And while I think donations are really great, while I think, showing up financially is powerful, it's also a one-time incident, right? Unless we're doing this every check, every month, every what have you, that's only one form of activism. And when I am doing like anti-racist consulting and facilitation, I like to look at this holistically, right? All the ways in which you hold privilege. How are you dismantling white supremacy in those spaces? How are you bringing yourself in spaces that I don't have access to and dismantling white supremacy there when I'm not in the room? When no one's kind of recording you or taking a picture or writing an article about it or kind of showing this work, what are you doing in those spaces? What conversations are you having at your dinner table with your white family about white supremacy, right? How is this an active conversation in every entity of your life on a daily basis? That to me is you working towards dismantling white supremacy and working towards this guise of being an ally.
So when you're doing those sorts of trainings, how are they generally reacting to that information?
So it's really interesting because I pair my roles as a therapist and a consultant together, which I think provides this entity of me being able to really pull out the emotions in white folk. And sometimes that makes them really uncomfortable because they were expecting like, oh, this is a training, here goes information, da, 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 and then I leave. That's not how I show up in the space. So frequently there's a lot of tears, right? There's a lot of white fragility. There's a lot of, defensiveness. There's a lot of, well, I'm not racist, or my favorite is I'm not white, I'm Irish, or I'm not white, I'm like, so now we need to bring this conversation back a little bit more around race and ethnicity. So it's important for me when I'm in those spaces to hold that, right, and name it and acknowledge it, and also challenge past it. And I think sometimes people get stuck in the white guilt or the white tears, and they're like, okay, this is too much. I feel too much. And there's this traumatic experience that happens for them, right? There's this experience of, holy shit, I've been doing some really, messed up things to the people around me. I'm so terrified about it. I'm going to avoid it. So for me, being a clinician, I'm able to kind of align with that feeling of, I'm seeing some defensiveness, I'm seeing some avoidance. How can we work through this and heal this for you so that this avoidance isn't imprinted on you forever? This isn't imprinted on you to the point where you're always running away from race. You're always running away from these difficult conversations, but walking them through it without the guise of, sometimes berating them in that, where it's tough, it's hard work. It's not easy for me to do all the time, but it's necessary.
Now, I don't know if you ever keep in contact with or follow up with the people that you have in those trainings, but do they often keep up the work? Like once they experience that and realize it and it dawns on them, do they actually then go and make change?
Some of them, not all of them. So right now in my consulting work, I actually don't like to come in for a one-time workshop. I like to actually come in, multiple times to really assess the growth of the people in that space, because I actually find it to be much more harmful to come in, especially for the folk of color in the company, to come in and say, okay, let's talk about race. All the white people realize that they're racist, all these tears happen, and then I leave, and then people are just stuck sitting with all of this while they're in a meeting the next day, right? Like I find that to be much more kind of distressing. So I like to do multiple workshops, right? Or multiple experiences of coaching through this. So we've named that we have this problem. Now, how do we solve it? How do we move through it? How do we move through that racial identity development for you so that you're not perpetrating this harm continuously with all the people in your life?
We know that white supremacy is everywhere in society. So it's not just cops, it's the judges, the schools, the therapist. just in general, they have to be aware of their own biases, race or otherwise. But how are they handling it when it comes to race? Are they now realizing like, whoa, my eyes were so blind to this. I didn't know how my Black clients were feeling about race or
Mhm.
how much trauma they were going through because of it. Like, are their eyes now open in that field?
Yes. I mean, well, not completely open, right? And for me, I have to frequently think about this field generationally, right? We have a lot of folk who've been in this field for 30, 40, 50 years. And what becomes disruptive is the gatekeeping is present in the beginning, but the gatekeeping for clinicians moving forward isn't really minded at all. So while we have things like CEUs to keep our training, you get to pick what CEUs you do.
What
So
CEUs?
CEUs are the like education credits that we
Oh,
have.
like a continuing education. Okay, got it.
Yep. So if I'm a, white 50-year-old clinician and I only work with anxiety, I could, if I wanted to, only take continuing education in anxiety, right? I could never take one on race. I could potentially never take one on white supremacy. I could potentially never take one on microaggressions. So that's where I think the field is really disrupted in that there isn't a regulation around which CEUs we have to take, which conversations we need to be in. And for a lot of our training, for a lot of our graduate programs, race isn't touched. Race isn't talked about. I fortunately went to a program where it was infused the majority of the courses, but there were also no Black faculty. So while it was a conversation that was continuously had, it wasn't institutionalized. And for that program, in comparison to all the other programs across the country, that conversation isn't always coming up. So you can go through your whole training never really talking about how culture plays a role in the room, how race plays a role in the room, how sexual orientation or gender plays a role in the room. So it's really icky for me to think about because I hear clients come into my space and say, I had this clinician that I'm pretty sure was racist and would say all these microaggressions in the space that is supposed to be safe. That's supposed to be a place where you kind of share all of this. So it's really disheartening. I'm pleased to be able to be at a space where I can supervise clinicians and like assist them through this process to ensure that those conversations are happening. But it's not happening everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's really sad in the therapy space
Yeah,
because that is where you're
you would
supposed to be
think.
unjudged.
But when we think about how white supremacy has played a role in mental health, specifically with Black folk, mental health and Black folk haven't always gone line up together, right? Black folk infrequently come to therapy, understandably so. So there was this almost idea, well, Black people aren't coming, so why do we need this training? And this, kind of dichotomy happening. But now we're seeing that more Black folk are coming to therapy. We have more Black clinicians, not enough. We still need more. But there's been a whole history of just the pathologizing of Black folk in mental health, which has led to us not wanting to be in that space.
In the last couple weeks, have you seen a lot of new clients? Like, have a lot more people been coming to therapy?
I've seen a lot of new clients, but I've also seen a lot of corporations reaching out for anti-racism training. That I think is what I've seen the most. Right now, I'm not accepting new clients. I don't get as many of those kind of calls anymore. But when I was, it was every week. There were at least 3 or 4 people reaching out for services. So I love to see that. But it's unfortunate because even the clinicians that I know of color, many of us, our caseloads are full because there's just not very many of us trying to serve the whole community.
Right. I saw this video last night on Instagram that I thought was really great. It was a white woman. She was a psychologist, but she was talking about the fact that she's like, white people are racist. And if they would just admit that and sit with that, we could actually have a conversation. But when they hear that term, I'm racist, it implies I'm a bad person and I'm mean. But what it actually means is that you've grown up in a racist society and been conditioned to believe certain things. She was like talking to white people and she's like, and we know it. We have these like code words. It's like, if you say it's a good neighborhood, that means it's mostly white. If it's a sketchy neighborhood, that means it's not so white. And she's like, so we've conditioned ourselves in so many ways to believe that white means it is good and other maybe not so good. And she's like, so if you could just admit that, we can actually start to move past it. But the issue is that just a lot of people won't even begin to admit that we've all, Black people included, been affected by white supremacy.
I had a workshop not too long ago, and there was someone in the space saying, I'm not racist. I've never been racist. That's not something that, I've dealt with or had to handle. And my response frequently to that is, that's really interesting because I'm a Black woman and I've even had to work through my own internalized racism. So how is it that you've skated through this world and haven't experienced anything of racism, haven't experienced any element of white supremacy? Like, help me understand, like, what did your life look like? Because I'm a little confused. And it's when I say that, when I kind of like stand with them and recognize like I too have been impacted by this, then I've noticed that people are able to say, oh, well, she said she is too, so I guess I can too, right? And then we can have that conversation. Then there's that acknowledgement of like, all right, I do make these comments around sketchy neighborhoods or what have you.
I hope that there's going to be some realizations that lead to actual change and action. So I've been getting some listener questions around everything that's been happening, and I want to read you one of them and then get your thoughts on it.
Sounds good.
This is from Yvonne, and she says, my significant other didn't want to come to a protest with me, but he's been posting a lot on social media. I feel like everyone should be getting out to force the changes that we all deserve. Now, I'm also feeling like he doesn't care about my safety because he let me go alone. I've been avoiding him since then, but the truth is, I feel like I've lost a lot of respect. Should I tell him, or am I overthinking this?
This is such a good one. This is such a good one because it touches on so many topics that I find are coming up in couples work right now. So first, Yvonne, I'm hearing from you that you really wanted to go to this protest, but your partner didn't want to go. And, they're posting things online. And what I'm hearing from you is that there's actually multiple forms of advocacy. There's multiple forms of activism. And what I've been noticing is a lot of Black folks specifically have been feeling this guilt or this shame for maybe not wanting to go to a protest, because to them, it's been internalized that this is the only way that we can show up as activists. But in reality, there's multiple ways that we can do this work. Protesting is one of them, or protesting isn't the only way that we do so. So for some, posting on social media, posting on Instagram is their way of, continuing this conversation and, using that tool as a form of activism. What I also heard from you, Yvonne, though, is this element around avoidance. This, I'm not sure if I should share this with my partner, share how I was feeling, because what I'm hearing is there's a feeling of, well, did you care about my safety? And also this feeling of, you're not showing up in the ways that I show up. What does that mean for our work, right? What does that mean for us as a couple? And in that case, those are two pretty important things to be discussing. And if your response to them is avoidance, I can imagine that's just going to build up and disrupt the relationship. So what would it look like for you to actually have that conversation with your partner and have that conversation from a feelings forward space of, I'm not upset with you or you're wrong or X, Y, or Z. I was feeling, uncared for when you didn't check in on me about the protest. I was feeling a little confused as to how you're showing up in your activism. So having that conversation about where you're coming from and also giving him space to share where he's coming from, right? Maybe there was a reason why he didn't want to go to that protest. Maybe there was some fear around his own safety, right? Giving him that space to kind of share his piece as well.
I kind of agree with her about the safety thing, though. Like, if I'm potentially going into a dangerous situation as my partner, I'm going to need you to come into the fire with me.
I hear that. And for many folk, that's the case, right? But that needs to be a conversation between the two of them.
Right. Like, she can't avoid it. Like, she has to have a conversation.
She can't. Because what you needed was, someone checking in on you, someone making sure that you're safe, and that's not showing up, like, we might have bigger problems. Right? It may not be the protest that is really sharing up this conversation or coming through with this conversation.
You know what I'm finding a lot happening right now? She's upset because the boyfriend didn't come to the protest, and then she didn't feel like he was concerned with her safety. But the reason that she's probably upset about this is like that might be an issue that's been bubbling up And I myself currently feel that. Like in my own relationship, I've had moments lately where there's been little things that I've let go for years. But for some reason, right now in this moment, I'm like, you know what? No, no, no. Now is the time. I will not take racism. I'm not going to take this BS either. and it feels like now I'm at this point where I'm just like, you know what? Enough is enough from every single aspect of life. Like I'm not taking any of it. So I'm feeling this need personally to like just push back and not put up with anything like at all, even if it's like something little. Like you said you were going to take out the garbage. You always do that. And then you didn't do it. I am not taking this anymore. This is BS.
When I'm working with couples and a conflict like this shows up, I frequently ask them, like, what is this really about? Is this really about the protest? Is this really about the garbage? Is this really about, what is really happening for you when you're having this reaction? Because frequently it has nothing to do with the garbage, with the protest. It's that a feeling has not been validated and a need has not been met. So at what points in your relationship have your needs of being protected, being cared for, being checked in on, haven't been met in this relationship? At what points did that show up for you, Yvonne? And then have that conversation.
I like that. I just was thinking, as you were saying it, I'm like, why was that showing up for me?
Why are you upset about the garbage? Yep.
Right.
And I do it with myself too, right? Like sometimes I'll get upset about, my partner being late to something. And I'm like, it's not the lateness, it's that I feel like this doesn't matter to them, right? Or they don't feel like this matters. So I'm having a whole reaction, like they don't care about this, they don't want to do this, blah, 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 when it's, no, girl, like the train was just late. Like they can't do nothing about that. So for me, it's also checking like what's happening for me when I am having such an activated emotional response.
And what are some of their top issues that they often bring up in counseling?
So frequently when I do phone consults, clients will say, we're working on communication. We want to feel closer to each other. Sex is typically a big one. Finances is always a big one. For a lot of my clients, I work with clients who are engaging in consensual non-monogamy. So exploring, opening up their relationship. What does it mean to have another partner? What does it mean for, one person in the relationship to be dating other folk? What are those boundaries? How do we navigate jealousy as it shows up? So those are the big ones that I see in my couples cases.
Do open relationships actually end up working out?
And I think that's a huge, narrative that they don't, because frequently what happens is people say they want an open relationship when they actually don't want to be in the relationship. And I think that's what we see, right? We see people who, say they want an open relationship, but don't actually tell the other person and then claim that it's an open relationship. So now there's this kind of infidelity or relationship boundary that has been disrupted, but you never told the partner that you wanted to open it up. So I work with couples who consensually want to be in non-monogamous relationships, and those tend to work rather well.
Really? Because I always think that inevitably and eventually, even if everybody is just honest and open and is communicative, just eventually somebody ends up feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick or not enough attention or not enough time. And, when there's an odd number, I feel like things always get a little foggy.
It's important to understand like how you view relationships and what the need or the desire is around opening up the relationship. So frequently I've worked with clients who have potentially been monogamous and then have decided to open up the relationship because a particular need wasn't being met. And when they've had that conversation and there's been not only, the deepening of the foundation of the connection between those two primary partners, but once we get to a space of saying, I really like this and you can't give this to me, but this person can, it actually disrupts people's anxiety around trying to show up and do everything in the relationship. It really gives them this like liberation and empowerment in saying, I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to do everything for my partner. They have this additional space of support and love that cherishes them and nourishes them in a way that I can't. And I value that. Like I want my partner to get all their needs met. So it can work. Absolutely. It just takes work. And sometimes people aren't willing to do that work.
But do most people take it well when they hear from their partner, I have a need that you can't meet?
They may not take it well at first, but that doesn't mean that they can't work through it, right? Because we've heard those comments before. Like sometimes my partner says they want to go play basketball for 3 hours or whatever it is. I'm not going to meet that need, right? And if that's a consistent need that you have every week, I'm not your girl. So maybe you need to find someone else to meet that need. So I'm using a frivolous example of basketball, but there are consistent needs that people have that they're not acknowledging or meeting. And that's when we see, infidelity show up. That's when we see that disconnection show up. That's when we see that lack of communication happening because people aren't getting their needs met and they're trying to find other ways of, navigating this constraint.
We don't have one for everything else in our life. We have a variety. And so like we don't own one pair of shoes for every single event we need to go to. Nope. We don't have one friend that we call for every single thing. Like exactly. we tend to know and have balance in other areas of our lives. But when it comes to relationships, we sort of do expect this one person to be, our best friend, the person we go do this with, the person we talk to about this, the person that fulfills us in this way and that way. And, that could be exhausting on both sides, but yet that's the paradigm that has been built and has stayed in place. And so now we all feel like we have to fit into that. And then when things aren't working, we just assume that the relationship must end because this one person is not meeting all my needs. I see how it could work and why.
That's where I work with clients to say, like, you can acknowledge that consensual non-monogamy works, but it doesn't work for you. And that's okay, right? It's not supposed to be for everybody.
Right.
But it's when we start to say like, oh, it never works or it can't work for anyone, then it's like, well, we're generalizing all relationships. Like, let's take a moment to step back and think about this a little bit more.
You also do courses for GLBTQ folks and people of color on a site called On the Mend. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So On the Mend was actually born out of the desire to decolonize what healing looks like, particularly for queer folk and folk of color. Because what I've seen is that mental health isn't always accessible for everyone, whether it's financial constraints, whether it's timing, whether it's scheduling, or even just like finding a therapist of color that aligns with so much of what you want. So a colleague of mine started On the Mend to provide healing courses for folk to support them in their healing outside of therapy. So we have courses on mindfulness, we have courses on emotional regulation, coping skills, stress management, finding a therapist, as well as creating goals. Because we've seen that for so many folk, you may want a therapist that help you get to some of these, but you may not need that whole therapeutic relationship. You may just need 6 weeks of catching up on some coping skills to get you through racial trauma, or catching up on some mindfulness, navigate conflict in your relationship, right? So giving people those tools that they would receive in a therapeutic space at their own time during their own space, because it's all pre-recorded and rather accessible because it's virtual now.
That's awesome.
So you can absolutely check out more of On the Mend. Our website is onthemendhealing.com and our Instagram is onthemend.co.
And then where can people reach you?
You can reach me on Instagram at Kenya Therapy, and my website is kenyacrawford.com.
But only in her top 5 posts. No, I'm kidding. After that, she's logging off.
Honestly, I can't be on Instagram too long.
Thank you again for coming on today. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please reach out to me at Tennesha Wood on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and let me know what you think of today's show. And until next time, wish me love. Hello again, my lovely listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of DRL. If you like the show, be sure to go on iTunes and leave a rating and also write a review. And don't forget to share with your friends and tell them all about DRL. Thank you so much for supporting.